Good morning. Welcome to another episode of Cybersecurity Amplified and Intensified with your host, Eric Taylor, myself, Shiva Maharaj. And today we are joined again by Cameron Buriani of CrowdStrike. What's going on, man?
Howdy. How you doing?
Same old,
You're living the dream. I feel it. So we had a nice long break. So now we're just going to get back onto the grind and get into it.
Welcome. So the reason we asked Cameron back on here is because in the news a few weeks ago before the cycle changed to other things, Pegasus and the NSO group were in the media, and I sent Cameron an email saying, hey, does CrowdStrike do anything for this? And Cameron replied graciously and quickly, and it appears you do. So I guess if you can go into a little bit about what Pegasus is from a 30,000 foot overview, and how does CrowdStrike help to identify and potentially mitigate these attacks?
Yeah, we can definitely talk about it. So Pegasus is it's a spyware-based tracking exploit from the NSO group. NSO group basically initially developed it as nation-state level spycraft in order to put it on their adversaries and be able to actually see vulnerabilities and understand what people are saying through like iMessages, Apple Photos, even things in like Apple Music. It was largely consolidated around Apple. Now, of course, we've seen some manifestations of it within Android and iOS. But really what this is the ability to put that spyware on potential adversary machines. Now, this started off as a white hat operation being used against adversaries of nation states such as, you have the Five Eye countries as well as Israel. And from there, it became something that was used in a malicious fashion by external adversaries. So what we're seeing now is we're seeing people who are using the Pegasus software in a malicious fashion in order to put it on specific iOS machines to read those capabilities. Now, this is the most troubling thing about this is we're seeing it in a zero trust fashion. And we're also seeing it in what's known as a zero touch fashion, which means there appears to be ability, at least on iOS machines, to put this on impacted workloads or mobile devices without having any form of end user intervention. There's no touch involved with it. So they're able to send an SMS message where then it is able to inject the adversary's form of spycraft, put it on that in the background, and then from there, read messages, call logs, whatnot, so forth. And it's the zero touch fashion that's really the most troubling about it. Typically, legacy, well, maybe not even legacy, but a lot of times in cybersecurity, you say there's always an element of consent, or there typically is an element of consent. The end user will click something, take an action, do something that is indeed malicious. And once we remove that and we go to a zero touch model, that's where it becomes especially nefarious because you can be one of the best, OpSec guy. But if you just get a random message and you don't touch it, you can still be impacted by the Pegasus spyware. And that's really the thing that bothers a lot of people the most about it is the fact that you can't take mitigative action just off your behavioral day-to-day life. You have to make sure that there's a layer of protection involved in it. So hopefully that's a decent high level view. There's obviously nuances associated with it, but that should kind of be a level set for individuals.
Now, do these messages have to be opened or is it just a matter of getting it onto the device just for clarity's sake?
It's just a matter of getting it on the device. Opening the message would of course constitute a touch. This is a zero touch methodology, which is frankly an ingenious way to do it if you're in a white hat setting, which it did manifest and originate as a white hat setting. The NSO group is typically used for counterterrorism operations over in the Middle East. But of course, through a series of acquisitions and sales, software like that can always fall into the wrong hands. And that's indeed what happened.
It's owned by a Japanese company now, I believe.
To my understanding, the NSO group is potentially an Israeli company.
It is, but I think they were sold a few years ago and I'll dig up the article on that.
Yeah, looking on the article. The chain of custody I know at least, and it could be Japanese from an owner. The chain of custody that I'm aware of is that it was initially started off as a defense application, then sold to an American venture capital firm, and then the American venture capital firm resold it for 10x the profit to another defense application, who then sold it to the United Arab Emirates, who are using it against like nation state level journalists and whatnot. So I think where the leak comes from is the UAE, United Arab Emirates, probably started using it, they started using it against journalists, against the regime, which got Amnesty International involved. And Amnesty International involved. So it's like, okay, well, you can't be targeting journalists. You have to be using this on legitimate nation state level threats. But of course, there could be a thread that involves, Japan as well. I'm not aware of that part.
Pick that up before we go publishing here.
Okay. But yeah, no, it's I think really where this got to the market in a malicious fashion is through the selling of it to the UAE, and the UAE was leaky from that point. So, and now we're seeing it starting to be used. At least we're seeing it manifest in the Middle East, which targeting journalists. And then there's also been some use against like white hat uses against people like the cartel down in South America, largely the Mexican cartel. The Mexican government credits the use of Pegasus in capturing. I think it's I don't know the names of the of those individuals that are running those organizations, but they credit it as being it. So, anyways, once you start using a software that much, it's hard to control exactly who has the chain of custody, and now it appears to have potentially leaked into vectors. So that's why it's now a potential concern for individuals largely leveraging iOS devices, not implying that it can't go to Android. Just know that we're seeing it mostly manifest on iOS devices. Android, it's still unknown whether or not it's actively exploiting it in a vulnerable status.
So how long has CrowdStrike Mobile been identifying?
So I've been seeing reports on the NSO group with CrowdStrike Mobile starting in about mid-July. We've been tracking it since it surfaced, but of course it's a known white hat methodology, but we've only been seeing it used malicious in the last couple of months. Now, here's what CrowdStrike can do to protect against these attacks. Now, when we're developing protection on mobile, it's all about having that visibility, right? And what we want to do is we want to develop tactics and visibility to mitigate the techniques used by adversaries and their testers, rather than the tools themselves. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to go on in and stop it within the chain of custody. Now, expanding beyond these generic capabilities, CrowdStrike will give you additional visibility for this by actually giving you the analyst, and they're going to deploy and have deployed indicators of compromise into the mobile sensor, which will allow you to identify network communications with all known domains associated with Pegasus. So that's the number one thing that we're doing right now. Full visibility into all known domains associated with Pegasus. If you go into an iOS device and you see an iOS device making communications bilaterally or even one direction to a known bad domain associated with Pegasus, that's a massive red flag. And we have those pre-baked into the UI for everybody to view at that point. So that's one of the number one things we're doing right now is full visibility into machines that are making those communications. Now, the second thing we're doing is we're going to generate mobile detections for those network communications linked to Pegasus, but in the future, we're going to provide the capability to block them. So I do want to be clear right now. We're not going to block those communications. If you install CrowdStrike on a mobile device that has Pegasus, we'll give you detection and we'll show exactly what device it is, where it's communicating, and when. But we're not blocking it yet. That's a future capability. CrowdStrike's mobile device capabilities right now is at full visibility, and we want to move towards a blocking stance. And that's something that we're going to hopefully achieve within the foreseeable future.
Now, isn't that a limitation on the iOS side because they really limit what any application should be able to do?
Yes, with iOS, it's very difficult simply because of how restricted the operating system is. And Apple in and of itself is not very conducive to kernel level players. Hence why they've been trying to move people out of the kernel, or Ring 0 rather, for years at this point. So it's increasingly difficult to perform prevention-based functionalities or to attempt to, but it's something that we're working closely with, our engineering team in order to be able to do that. But yes, it is a hard operating system limitation that makes it more difficult. But of course, that begs the question what we do for Android. Android is still in the visible state. So it's just kind of where the product stands as it is. When CrowdStrike does a product release, I think we mentioned this last time, we kind of do a minimally viable product. What we do is we bring a minimally viable product to market because we're not hubristic enough to say, I know what the market demands. I know what's going to happen. Bring a minimally viable product and iterate based on the demands that you see either from the customers or from the threat landscape. If you say, well, I think it's going to be X, and you spend all your development time and resources to deliver a completely polished product that hits use case Y, but the market demands X, you're in a kind of a pickle, right? So if you get yourself to a point where you can start to steer that ship based on the wind's flow, you can meet the demands and address the threats. And that's basically what we're doing with mobile.
So is there going to come a point, before we get too far down the line, in the feature set, I'm sure this is not going to be a possibility, but would there be a possible containment like we can, or network isolation that we can with the current Falcon agent on the mobile device or any sort of mobile device, right? So tablet, iPhone, whatever the case is.
Yeah, definitely. So containment's a core thing for us. We want to make sure we have the ability to contain. We won't be able to install on tablet right now. We're just doing iOS and Android from the mobile standpoint. But yes, containment is something that we're working on and looking into. So we want to get to that stance where you can actually contain those machines. Now, I do want to make a caveat here. Do note that CrowdStrike is a exceptionally robust visibility tool. There are a lot of tools like that, but I typically recommend people only put the CrowdStrike agent on company operated and owned machines.
Mm-hmm.
It's exceptionally intrusive, and I'm no Luddite by any means, but there is a balance to be had with security versus the notion of privacy. So when you're looking at managing machines in order to protect from a Pegasus-based spyware, start to think, why would something hit that? Why would I have Pegasus spyware? What's the end game objective? For a standard civilian, it shouldn't be too much of a problem. But of course, once you start to get to corporate assets, you look at corporate espionage, you look at individuals trying to see your corporate data. I guess, of course, in a civilian sector, if you're accessing your bank accounts, it will potentially pick up things like that. But once you start to think about why would I need it, I'd highly encourage people to restrict them to corporate devices, simply just to create a nice boundary between, your personal cell phone and, of course, a company-owned workload, because there is a lot of visibility.
In terms of the visibility, what are you seeing? Well, not you. What is CrowdStrike Mobile seeing when Pegasus is passing data, for lack of better words?
So one of the most important things that we're seeing, obviously, is communications to the known C2 server. So when you go on in, we see the C2 server communicating. That's obviously going to be important. We're also seeing the running, when you actually capture a stackshot file, we can see the list of running processes. And if you see the running processes, you can actually identify the indicators of compromise that have been identified by Amnesty International. And you can identify those and run through there with the EDR data. Those are going to be seen in the running processes. Amnesty International released a GitHub repository with all the known indicators, and those are pre-baked into CrowdStrike. So do you guys do like show notes?
Mm-hmm. We do, yes.
Okay, let me drop this in there. You might already have it, but you can drop the show notes for Amnesty International's GitHub repository. And I just put it in there. So if people want to go do that, you could take that to the Splunk data with CrowdStrike, run it for those indicators of compromise, and see if those running processes are indeed running at that point, because we will be gathering them.
Very cool. Yeah, appreciate that link.
You just mentioned Splunk. How deeply tied in to the Falcon platform is Splunk for those listening? Because I know that's one of the main reasons I chose you guys, just as much as, you chose me.
Yeah, no, it's a mutual relationship on that front. I said, hey, this guy's a cool cat, and you said the same thing, so it worked. But with CrowdStrike, we have an OEM integration into Splunk, so you're going to get a Splunk backend built into the box right out of the gates. And that's actually the backbone of the CrowdStrike software. So when we look at our EDR-based visibility, all it's stored within a Splunk-based repository, of which we host in a isolated AWS instance. Everybody gets their own Splunk. It is integral to the CrowdStrike software insofar as the visibility goes. You look at certain modules like mobile module. You look at modules like Falcon Discover, which is an IT hygiene module. You look at modules like Spotlight. Any time you start to build off-core prevention-based capabilities, you have to have the EDR or that Splunk backend as the backbone in which to pivot off. So it is indeed the integral portion of CrowdStrike. I typically tell people that, based on your security needs, you can go in without the Splunk. And it's known as the Defend package, at least in the MSP space, which is just the core AV. It's just protecting and blocking with minimally viable coverage is what I call it. MVP, minimally viable coverage, similar to the product methodology. But once you really want to do things like mobile, view the Pegasus-based spyware, do anything advanced more than just stopping and triaging the bleeding, it requires that Splunk backend, of which we are Splunk's largest OEM partner. It is the central tenet of the CrowdStrike visibility.
So how is the mobile going to tie into the zero trust assessment module that's inside of CrowdStrike? And can you dive in? Because I know I'm kind of pivoting a little hard there, but how partners could be able to potentially look at CrowdStrike and obtaining zero trust assessments for their client base.
Yeah, ZTA is a newer feature. ZTA is, of course, zero trust assessment, where we're actually going to identify identities and misconfigurations at the operating system level to show if you need to restrict secure kernel boot, you need to do anything at an operating system level, which, should we have this configuration set as X or should we move it towards Y? And then we'll give you a score assessment with it. To my knowledge, I don't I don't want to speak definitively on it. I'm not sure if we have that today within mobile, but we are moving towards a ZTA style assessment, a zero trust environment, as seen with our acquisitions. So it is something that we want to eventually bring to mobile, but I'm not entirely sure if that's available on mobile, at least as it stands today commercially.
Gotcha.
But you do get zero trust dashboards. So if you are a CrowdStrike customer, if you want to become one, ZTA dashboards are built out of the box for individuals who have insight, which is the EDR portion. So, for both Barricade as well as Continuum, you guys have the ZTA dashboards, and that's just part of the standard updates that we do. And you're going to see us evolve on that a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, just from our side on Barricade, I've been going through it pretty heavily. It was like, oh crap, I didn't even think about doing this. I didn't think about doing that. Like we always talk about, always do a zero trust, and, we kind of hammered around even when you just mentioned the secure boot, and that's one of our current projects. It's one of the most painstaking tasks to do, but what are the chances of somebody injecting a potential malware in the strain of a boot up process? Pretty minimal, unless you're, really being attacked by ADP or ATP, but do you really want to take that chance, especially when you have clients that are in manufacturing or finance?
Do you have to take that chance, right?
Yeah.
So that's really the question. Do you want to, and do you have to? So security is all about reducing risk. There's intrinsic risk involved in operating in the world. I mean, I suppose you can live in a world where you want to reduce risk to net zero, but that's not even viable. You get on the road, I mean, you're driving. You can get in a car accident. You can get pulled over by a cop. Anything can happen. There's intrinsic risk, but you do everything you can do to mitigate that risk, such as go the speed limit. Make sure you're not impeded in any way from a cognitive standpoint when you're on the road. Same thing with security. Drive it to a net neutral status. We don't have to leave those vulnerabilities open. Just drive it in. There's going to be some implicit risk. But again, if we can go in and reduce secure kernel boot, like you said, it's a minimal risk, but it doesn't have to be there. And it's something that you can just spend 10 to 15 minutes, lock it down. And guess what? You're showing value to the clients. You can go in and say, hey, you know what? You want to know what we did this week? We locked down all these security configurations. And that's something that you just got from the ZTA dashboard rolled out.
Yep, absolutely.
I do want to say that I just researched who owns the NSO group, and it was resold to the founders a couple of years ago. So I was incorrect when I mentioned any Japanese company having an ownership stake. So I do want to put that out there. That was my bad.
No, you know what? It's good that you brought that up, because they do a lot of stuff with cybersecurity. What was the there used to be an old, there used to be an old style malware, an old style AV tool that was Japanese based. I'm trying to remember. It was very popular back in the day.
I don't even recall. Maybe that's more Eric's wheelhouse.
I'm trying to remember. It's not Trend. I think Trend is English, if I'm correct. Anyways, they did have I know there's one, and I see the logo in my head, but I can't see what it says.
All right, Eric, let's fire up a Microsoft Paint and have Cameron do some drawing here. But in the meantime, one thing I do want to ask you about, and this is somewhat of a pivot away from mobile, USB control with CrowdStrike, and specifically tying that to the recent, proof of concept of Razer peripheral devices launching as with elevated privileges.
Yeah. So with USB-based device control, what we're able to do on that is, when you start to look at launching with elevated privileges, a lot of things that we recommend doing with USB-based device control is doing a net neutral status of only allowing certain USB-based devices. So when you look at escalation controls, when you look at legacy installs like, the rubber ducky attack, when you look at people coming in through USB vectors, I just talked to a Canadian partner who their biggest problem right now is in Canada, they're handing out these free chargers, and it looks like an iOS charger, looks like an Android charger, and they plug them in, and then it does the standard rubber ducky style attack. Because what you're able to do is, if you ever seen like those wireless mice where it's no bigger than a fingernail, you put it in there and it's almost flush, and now your mouse has a USB connector. They build those into the chargers, so it looks like you're charging your phone, but it's actually a malicious exploit based. Mm-hmm. And that's actually pretty ingenious, because when you think about the people who are security minded, oftentimes we don't even consider a charger as potentially being an exploit vector. But that's a really common one that's rising, is using chargers in order to do USB based device attacks, which is why CrowdStrike's now recommending that we go on in and do a full block of USB-based devices and only allow a certain subset of them. And you'll identify them, right? You'll go in and say, hey, for my practice, we got 16 Corsair USB devices, and you have to use those 16. Otherwise, it's a full block on all the policies. And that's typically the best way to go about that.
And are you doing that by class?
You can do it by class. You can do it by serial number. You can do it by a variety of things. You can even do like by class for an individual group of users. So you could say class is mass storage, full block for all users except IT, or a class equals mass storage, full block for all users except these. You could do a company ID. Company would be, just to use the Corsair example, Corsair. That's a little more wide than we like it. We'd like you to do it by the actual, the serial number, which you'll plug in. You'll get a number associated with that actual USB device. And then of course you can allow it from there and then just get like a handful, right?
And just to reiterate on what Cameron's talking about, there's a company that's really, really popular in space called OMG, O-MG, but they have, even in the Type C classifications, they have a built-in mini Wi-Fi transmitter. So if you have the app loaded up on your, I think it's only available on Amazon or Android, not Amazon. What the heck am I thinking today? I need more coffee. But if they have it on Android, you can sit there in real time on your mobile device within, I think it's only 30 or so feet, because that small of a transmitter is not going to work very far, right? But you can see real time keystrokes instead of using a C2 application. So you can be potentially, if your parking lot's close enough and your attacker or the person you're trying to steal the information from is that close, you could potentially be in the parking lot being able to
you can park on the next story in the bathroom, right? Yeah.
Just one more thing you could do in the bathroom.
You can be in the Amazon truck outside hiding.
Yeah, now you're really getting the paranoia going. You're like, hey, what's that black van out there? What's going on in that one?
They don't use black vans anymore. They just they paint the truck to look like an Amazon or a FedEx truck, and those things are everywhere.
Oh, you wouldn't even think about it, right? Like, you probably just see the Amazon truck. You're like, hey, cool, ordered that last week.
Like, what did my wife order today?
Yeah, they can get in big trouble with that one. Like, hey, we're trying to save here,
What do you think is the ideal CrowdStrike stack, for lack of better words, when a company is deploying your products? Because you have a few different SKUs. And let's say EDR is definitely in there. What else would you think is a best practice to add in there?
Well, I think you should always have Insight, right? Which is the EDR portion. That's why I was referring a little bit earlier to the notion that if you just go with just our core AB-based functionalities, which is in the MSP world known as Protect, minimally viable coverage. I don't typically recommend any partners get minimally viable coverage, simply because it becomes difficult for us to help you as a partner. So, if you chose to partner with CrowdStrike and build out an MSSP practice, this is designed to be a continual relationship. For example, why I'm on these calls with you, because we're helping out continually, right? So if you come to me and Eric says, for example, Cameron, I got this attack. Can you tell me what you think about it? If you don't have the EDR portion, it becomes difficult for me to do any form of investigative action. It becomes difficult for our T team to do any form of investigative actions. We can only just look at that immediate process tree and take an educated guess based on it. So it's more of something where in that case, typically the recommended remediation advice is going to be, well, looks like it was terminated. Looks like the machine's fine. I can't do any searching. And your policies are okay. So just sit tight. Your policies are good. Everything's in a good policy. And no one wants to hear that. They want to say, well, let's go take those artifacts and let's go see all the machines that are compromised. That's where we have to have Insight or the EDR portion. So the recommended stack is, if you can, at least get Insight on those machines, because you're not using it every day. And some people will say, oh, well, Cameron, of course I use it every day. Sure. All right. But when you need it, it's quite invaluable. And it's something that you're going to be happy when you do have it. So I recommend Insight, of course. And then mobile is something that I do recommend on a tactical case-by-case basis, especially with the rise of Pegasus software being used in a malicious fashion. I do want to make sure we call out that you do have to use an approved MDM to deploy to mobile devices. You can't just scan a QR code like you used to be able to. If you're putting this on iOS devices, you have to use our approved MDMs. And I forgot what they were, but I think...
I like that because we use Intune. Microsoft Intune for it.
Intune is one of them, yeah. So, okay, Citrix, we allow you to do that. Jamf, Microsoft Endpoint Manager, formerly Intune, of course. Mobile Iron, Sophos Mobile, MDM Workspace ONE, formerly AirWatch. So those are the ones that are supported. You do have to have an MDM to deploy that. So that's a huge thing we should mention. If you're thinking here like, hey, I want to use CrowdStrike Mobile, sounds cool, don't want to get hit by Pegasus, or at least want to know when Pegasus is on there, you got to have one of those MDMs.
I will tell you, I was very disappointed last year when I figured that out. But then I sat down and I thought about it and I said, you know what? With putting an EDR on a device, at least there's a real process tree you have to go through, and someone just can't slip it onto your device, which quickly turned me around on it.
Yeah, I remember telling you that, and you weren't too keen on it. You were keen on it. I was like, hey, dude, I wish I had more say on it. But yeah, now that you point it that way, like, would I want CrowdStrike slipped on my device? No, I wouldn't. I would. It's got a ton of visibility, and it's never. What means security and privacy is always a balancing act, and it's not a privacy thing. When you think about privacy, it's like there's like, well, what do you have to hide? It's not that we have anything to hide. It's I question the intentions or the motives of the individuals reading it. I don't know. You don't know them, right? So, when I think about privacy, that's what it is. It's not about my actions. It's about, I can't control what another person does with that data. And that's what it is for me. It's, I don't know their motives. You don't know their motives. You only know what you're doing and how somebody interprets a fact. When you perceive things, you see something, you can have somebody say, well, that plant is green. The other guy says it's gray. Well, he's colorblind. Who actually has the true notion of what reality is? Perhaps his view is the actual core and everybody else has a skewed perception. That's a little bit abstract, but in the same level, when you come to a privacy standpoint, you can see data of which you would think is completely benign uses. Another person says, whoa, they can see demons in the shadows. And that's why, you want to make sure you have an MDM. So it's an approved installation method. So that way authorized users on authorized devices have the ability to deploy it.
One thing sorry, go ahead, Eric.
You bring up a very good point that I just don't want to skim over, because we at Shiva, we get beat up a lot, especially in the MSP community, because we tend to ask a metric F-ton of questions of any prospect. And Cameron, you've seen this, and we were talking to you and Nick and everything like that, and it was like, what are you doing with our data? How can we trust you? Do you have, you going through your audits and stuff? And when most of these companies can't answer these things, that you're going to really put your trust in your clients' data and potential access to be a glorified C2 product into people you can't trust. It's like, yeah, everybody else is using them. Why not? Well, come on.
I much rather a vendor tell me, yes, we have complete access to everything and I can see everything you do. I prefer that. And I would use that vendor over a vendor that just ignores the question.
Yeah. And you want transparency, right? Because if they ignore the question, it's like, well, why are you ignoring it? Are you not taking it seriously? If somebody comes in and like you said, I have full access, we can see everything, you're going in eyes open. They're being transparent about the motives. And that's where it does indeed become important. Because you're right. It's not just, we use these word data, but what does that actionably mean? If somebody gets your data to your E-Trade account, there's your 401k right there. Somebody gets the data to your bank account. Do you know how hard, I don't need to tell anybody, but going through like, what do they call it? Insofar as like going through like identity credential and stuff like that, it's, that's just such a laborious process. And a lot of people can't take those type of financial hits, the time, the strain. That's what data translates into. It's, it's financial loss, it's stress, it's concern, it's worry, things that you don't need to be on there. The world as it exists is already at a base level of stress enough that building onto it is not going to do anything for our life expectancy. So let's be conscious about where we put our data. Let's make sure it's a trusted vendors who at least acknowledge the responsibility, and let's move forward in a sensible fashion about it.
One thing I want to add to that is I think a lot of employees and even a lot of employers don't understand that a corporate device should automatically say you have zero privacy when you use it, because it is an asset that belongs to the company.
Yeah, no, I would agree. Corporate devices, a lot of people are pretty lenient on corporate devices, and it's, you just got to start to think like this is a company asset. You're doing company style work. So, they're going to have full visibility on that. And they, to a lesser degree, or to a larger degree rather, should have full visibility because, it is a company device. And that's where you want to make sure that you can see what's happening on it, because it's not just about like, well, we want to see what you're doing on there. You just don't know if there's something with an exfil method on that. If you leave a vulnerable state or if you don't have visibility into this portion of your user base, that's exactly where you would attack. That's where an adversary would start to target. Where do they not have visibility? Where can I get under the radar? And that's where you want to actually hit. So once you get that full blanket coverage, it's not about looking at your actions and making sure, well, what are you doing? It's let's make sure that nothing malicious is coming in externally to steal that company data. Or you could also make sure that you're not doing anything to leak company info as well. But that's largely in your control.
Cool. Eric?
That's it for me. I mean, really a conversation. I really enjoy the talk today, Mr. Cameron.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. I mean, I'm always down to talk about anything. I know that you guys run these a lot, so hopefully it was informative for you and your viewers. And yeah, correct me in the comments. Also, I did Google it. That Trend Micro is actually Japanese based, so I was wrong on that. So there you go. Trend is it. So
Well, there you go. No, but I would like to thank you for coming on and addressing what I would call the core strengths of the Falcon platform and the fact that you gain extensibility into mobile devices, which is increasingly where most corporate workloads are being accessed, especially in a, work from anywhere mentality.
Cool. Yeah, no. And if anybody has any questions, as always, you guys can reach out to me, and we'll go from there.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.
Thanks again so much for tuning in. Please listen to our podcast on Amplified and Intensified. YouTube version is located at youtube.barricadecyber.com. Please help us spread the word. Share this content if you enjoyed it with somebody you think will enjoy it as well. And until next time, take care.